like you said, you're going to be heading over to Oslo and Stockholm. Like they'll have the 300-meter hurdles, they'll have the 400-meter hurdles, which is interesting because like they're just starting to run the three hurdles, on the Diamond League now, right? I mean, I don't know. What do you think of them introducing that a little bit now?
I think it's amazing first and foremost because now it keeps the athletes really dialed into what they want to do on the track. And it breaks up the monotony
Yeah.
of watching the typical races on the schedule year in and year out. Um, and I guess World Athletics, they're really trying to figure out how they're going to, you know, provide to this growing audience in which we do have. I mean, because we once had an audience of or I would say spectators or our initial audience were people who were really just glued in to the sport and statistically and but then you see all these records have fallen and these athletes are steadily getting better. Everybody's always consistently on the edge of their seat. You got the younger athletes coming up, and they're just shocking everybody. You got those who've been around, athletes who saw rise and didn't get injuries, and they dropped a little bit, but they're figuring it out. And it's always a guessing game when it comes to athletics. With your training, health, conditioning, sponsors, opportunities to run. I mean, even the fact that how I just kind of look at and compare to when I was participating, like the world ranking system and athletes having opportunity. I remember when I was in school, if you were ranked basically in the top 10 in the world, you'll get opportunities from the meeting directors in Europe primarily, and get invitations. And it was, and so you just bounce around and get opportunity to go to places in Europe. But now with the ranking system, if you don't have the points,
Yeah.
or even the times or the opportunity to participate in the meets to get the points, uh, it's hit or miss. And most times, a lot of athletes, I'm realizing it's a lot of miss now, you know.
That's so
And
true.
I, it's. I look at the organizations of meetings obviously a lot different now because obviously being a former athlete, you're just kind of focusing on getting there healthy, getting a little rest, showing up to the meetings, running fast enough so you can get whatever little bonuses you may have, and incentives in your little contract, and your parents' money. Um, but now you got to do well, and you just can't show up to a meet and run against the A crowd, with your fellow competitors and think you're on cruise control. You know, uh, because primarily a lot of the big meets were here in Europe, but now they
All
got
over it.
folks are just jumping off in other places all over the world, and you just go, "Whoa!" I mean, it's really crazy, especially after the meetings they have. You go, "Damn, this person did this over there in Rabat. This person did this, in China. This
Yeah.
person did this in Miami." And I'm going, "Oh, it's really hazardous, crazy trying to keep up with all that." But I think that's the fun part about it.
Yeah, it is so crazy because yeah, I imagine back then in the 90s and the 80s, like you didn't have all these meets in China, like in Africa, right? Like it was
You
mostly
didn't.
Europe.
You didn't. They're all generally centralized here in Europe. You had, you had your like main countries that, Italy always had a number of meets in all the different cities they had there. Germany definitely had a lot of meets
Hmm.
in places that they had there. You can find UK would have a schedule, obviously, in that area, and but generally, in Spain will have meetings. So and obviously the meets will be kind of centered around obviously good weather,
Yeah.
the weather
Hmm.
conditions of the day, and the opportunity to have the breaks between a lot of the athletes from different areas around the world. Um, it was interesting because I guess for me, the sweet spot was always right after national championships, NCAA championships for the collegiates. Because once everybody's done that, they want to get that little bit of rest and have an opportunity to get over to Europe. But now the cool piece is, they can rest up a little bit at home and probably and just stay at home
Yeah.
and don't have to, fly out unless, you made it some sort of national team or you just had a great opportunity. But like you
Yeah.
said, if you don't have the world rankings and all that, you won't have an opportunity to do any of that.
Yeah, so true, so true. Now, I wonder because you, at least in terms of Oslo, Stockholm, we'll have 300 hurdles, we'll have 400 hurdles. You competed. I was looking back. You competed at Stockholm specifically, like a lot. You won a couple, like some good races
Yes,
back then
yes,
on
yes.
the.
When they had the Mobile Grand Prix, when Mobile was the big sponsor of athletics years ago, They had the initial schedule for World Athletics, basically IAAF, and the Bislett game was always on that calendar, and it was so crazy because I actually remember the very first time, even before I had even sort of a great world ranking, I had an opportunity to run at the Bislett games, and it was so crazy because at that time it used to be standing room only, and it was smoking in the stadium, right? And I remember being there after competing, going up in the stands, or just watching the folks in the stands. They're standing up like if you go to an outdoor bar or something. They got the tall standing tables, and they're just standing there smoking their
In
cigarettes
this stadium.
and
That's
and, and, and,
crazy.
and literally enjoying the meat. So you just kind of look over your shoulder, like, oh, okay, they're smoking. But the entertainment and the focus is obviously on the track. So obviously years later, no more smoking in stadiums and on planes and that sort of thing. I think that's pretty much been the biggest change. Um, but yeah, the Bislett Games was always big, but then of course in Stockholm was always big. That was actually the initial diamond meet, the Stockholm meet, because
Mm.
they used to give out a diamond. They used to
Oh
get out an
yeah.
actual diamond, I guess a pair of diamond, I was earrings or something. I never raced at that time to win a diamond at the Oslo meeting. I mean, but the Stockholm meeting. But it was always a great place to go there to run, and it's really because I think DN Gallantly, the big newspaper, was the
Mm.
big sponsor at that time, and it was just a blessing, man. As a young collegian coming out of LA, just being able to travel to Europe and then to go to these great places and see these great cities, and it's like wow, and then get the opportunity to get back home and tell your friends the places in which you've been to.
And I mean, you coming from Watts, it's like I could only imagine like
Man.
you probably have friends who were like, I don't even know where you went, right? Like,
Exactly. I mean, it's so funny because everyone, I mentioned I live in Switzerland. A lot of people say, "Oh, you live in Sweden?" I'm like, "No, no, the other one, right?" They get that one mixed up a lot. Uh, but I remember that was always one of the things when I had an opportunity to travel internationally, was to get an opportunity to get back home in those windows of the summer to hang out with my buddies and just kind of let them know some of the places in which I had been to. I mean, the first place I went to that really just was a shocker for me was going to Moscow back in
whoa,
1986 when they had the Goodwill Games.
whoa,
And
okay,
it was communist Moscow. I mean, USSR. It was all that, and that experience was amazing uh, from two different levels. One, it was amazing being a very young international athlete, watching the seasoned vets move around and carry themselves internationally, and the little cliques that track and field has within the sport itself. Um, and then actually watching athletes like, keeping an eye on athletes like Edwin Moses and Jackie Joyner, and like I said, the seasoned athletes, and see how they move around. Because one thing being on a national team, and another thing is watching the top tier athletes, how they move around and do their thing. And I remember as a young athlete, that was one of the things I've always watched. I remember watching Ben, watching Chidi Emu, um,
yeah,
watching all these guys. Obviously, watching Carl
yeah,
and, without being a member of SMTC at the time,
hmm
and it was just a big education for me. First and foremost, having an opportunity to travel, but then just kind of literally looking at the sport of track and field. Because the crazy thing is, you never think about it as a career move or decision. It was always like an opportunity to leave your space and time and go somewhere else in places in which you probably obviously you read about in books and watched in movies. You get to these places, you see, like I said, one of the biggest, I remember the Berlin Wall was still up when I was competing. And when
hmm
they were tearing that wall down back around with 89,
yep,
it was even the sense of I guess the energy
yeah,
when that wall got knocked down, how it just really changed everybody's kind of obviously the perception of East and West Germany, but even especially when it came to international sports, especially when it came to track and field, because you would see those demarcation, those lines that were drawn literally between athletes who were on the west side and the east side when we come to meetings. For instance, in Zurich, you'll find a lot of the athletes from East Germany. They would really be being kind of funneled and move around in a certain direction and not really interact and exchange with a lot of the other international athletes. And as the years went by, that started to open up more. And then you just started people getting more cordial toward one another in those places. And so being as an outsider kind of watching this, it was always a history lesson for me going, wow, this is kind of really, really crazy. I wouldn't say crazy, but really interesting, I would say.
Yeah,
Really
and it's wild because, like you said, you're a young athlete who's just learning, just
18,
learning.
19 years old. I had never been on a plane before. I mean, I've been on like little prop planes going up the coast of California between LA and Modesto and Bakersfield, places like that. But I had never been on a, wide body, flying in, especially flying from LA to New York City, then going from New York
Yeah,
on over to Europe. And that was
man.
always just the experience itself. And
Yeah,
I'm always the kind of person that when I had that opportunity, I didn't want to, mess it up. I was like, man, this is cool. This is really cool. To be able to go on the
yeah,
international. And like I said, I was always a spectator too, watching Edwin and Danny and Nat Page and obviously Carl,
yeah,
uh, all the international athletes. Because I like how it is when you're in college, you were flipping through track and field news, uh, and you see all these superstar athletes over the years, and next thing you know, you have an opportunity to be on the cover of the magazine. So it was always like, I kind of, I made it.
that is so fire. That is so fire. It's crazy because yeah, like it's so different now where, athletes are, they're hopping off like going all over the world, much easier and like to various different places that maybe even
Yes.
back then you wouldn't haven't even imagined. But it's like almost you guys back in the 80s and 90s, like y'all set the foundation for like, what athletes are doing now in terms of the travel and the experiences and the competition that, people are throwing down, which is
Mhm.
really, really cool. I do wonder if back in kind of the 80s as you were coming out of UCLA and then even going into the 90s, like how often did you compete against some of your top competition? Because I know sometimes now, especially with these three guys, at least Rye, Carson, and Allison, like they compete sometimes, but not as often as we might think. But I wonder, like, if you really went head to head with your top competition all the time.
It was so crazy for me because obviously Edwin ran in races in which were predetermined by the meet organizers because they wanted to get the big bang for their buck. He was, he drew the crowd in, 'cause you never
Yeah,
knew when he was going to step on the track and break a record.
yeah,
I got lucky enough being a member of SMTC with Carl Lewis because after 84 Olympics, or wait, maybe now I was after World Championships in 83. So it kind of 80, 83, 84, 85. I ran internationally for the first time in 86.
mm,
So that was a period where, I mean, you had Seb Coe. Folks were like running the sport, running the federations now. Seb Coe was top 800-meter runner.
yep.
And of course, members of SMTC, you had Johnny Gray, uh,
Oh,
Earl
Danny
Jones,
Everett was in there.
myself, Danny, Steve
Yeah,
Lewis,
Steve
Henry Thomas,
Lewis.
Mike Marsh,
Yep.
Leroy Burrell.
Yeah.
Uh, we had literally we had an LA faction of SMTC and we had the Houston faction. So and then summertime is when we all connected. The crazy thing was this though, collegiately, it was a lot of collegians on SMTC back in the day too. They gave us that opportunity. And the cool thing was we raced amongst one another at our respective universities and colleges and going to different conference championships and meets and just meeting each other that way. And then once that summer came on, we had folks from University of Houston, Leroy,
Yeah.
uh, him coming over. We had what's Courtney's last Hawkins, Courtney Hawkins.
Coney
I
Hawkins.
heard
Okay.
he was running. We had Mark Witherspoon. He went to Abilene Christian.
Ah,
So
okay. Yeah.
we just had athletes. We had our Texas guys. We had our LA guys, and then summer came. We came and we just met up in summer. The cool piece, we went to different places in Europe, and we just hung out as a team, as a club. I mean, folks like Dennis Mitchell when he was a Gator. Like I said, we had all these. We were all like I said, we'd known one another collegiately, and then we started racing internationally for our respective clubs. But those collegiate rivalries, our rivalries were still set in stone. They were still set in
I could
stone.
imagine it's like intense because y'all repping your schools, but then y'all come together for the track club.
Track club for the track club, and that's one thing we've lost. That's the period. I mean, that particular experience that I remember and really cherished. and became a part of that transition collegiately, becoming a member of a particular club. That was like the access that athletes had, in order to kind of segue into running internationally and being able to represent, because typically um, athletes are either done with their collegiate season, or they're redshirting, or they're just summer and they're running either unattached,
Yeah, yeah.
or if they're typically usually running unattached. And because a lot of them may not have an opportunity to run with a club, because at that time I truly believe a lot of the shoe sponsors are really focused. Well, I would say a lot of them. The major shoe sponsors were obviously focusing in on LDR.
Hmm.
That's their moneymaker, long distance running and races. But then you get a shot in the dark. You get a Carl Lewis, who's sprinter, long jumper, and then you really start seeing the shoe manufacturers do a bit more catering toward these outliers in the sport. Um, you know, Companies that are really known for running shoes now are getting
Yeah.
into the sprint game, and their whole design works are changing, or have would become changes. Uh, and then obviously you have your track guys, your track folks, and you have your field folks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
with Carl and Leroy's, they were track and field guys. So obviously when you had a shoe company like an Asics, I remember um, when I ran with Asics, it was myself, Leroy, Stephen Lewis, Johnny
Mhm.
Gray, and we ran with Asics. But Asics was lovely because Leroy was their headliner
Mhm.
at the time, and they have him on the long jump runway and have him on in the 100-meter race, and the camera was always focused on him, and then of course Carl, because I remember Carl went from running with Nike to Mizuno.
Yeah.
Think about that. That time Mizuno was only making baseball gloves, probably some golf clubs and golf bags. They weren't doing, and I think they may have had maybe distance shoot runners, but they wouldn't run. They wouldn't make it at the time. They wouldn't focus on making any sprint shoes. And then
Mm.
Carl got the opportunity to run with them in 91, maybe around then, uh, and just kind of put those other. Deodora was another company to start putting
Theodora. Yeah.
uh, lights and flashlights on those particular brands, and so it's it I'm just blessed to be around, still to watch the, I guess, the changes in the sport, and just but I can imagine my mentors in the sport, how they looked at it and saw the sport, and the evolution of it. It's just, like I said, I have my perspective, then
Yeah.
you start pouring in the NIL piece in the
Oh, yeah.
2020. It's a whole nother fire.
It's a whole different thing. Because even
A
like
whole different thing.
right before, because before you came in, like in this, you talk about the 70s, like the sport wasn't even professional at that point, right? Like money started to
Put
really
it this
flow
way,
in.
yeah, it was pseudo professional. You have a lot
Yeah.
of paying. Everybody's that amateurism piece was just the word that kind of everybody needed and wanted to disassociate themselves with, because they knew
Hmm.
it was money in the game. But even a lot of the meet directors, they knew who they wanted to pay and who they did not
Mm.
want. And they, for a number of years, decades, they got away with, taking care of their top tier athletes, and everybody else was just lucky or happy to be in the lane next to them. And that's
Yeah.
just the experience that you would typically have if you're coming from, college, and then you're going to Europe. It's like, and you're literally in race in a lane next to one of your childhood heroes. So you're just like, wow, a lot of you're just trying to get the osmosis. You're just trying to get the energy that's on the track at that point in time. You're not thinking about. I remember because I remember for a fact, like different. You got me thinking now, reminiscing. I remember the very first time I made $1,000 in a race.
Ye-
I
What?
remember. I remember. I just because you show up just to plane ticket, the buffet, hotel, right? So you might get lucky and get smashed off a couple $100. But I remember I ran a race July 17th, Thursday, Paris, um, rainy day. I ran 50 point flat. I
Hmm.
never forget that. And I got paid $1,000. And I was like,
Man.
damn, I got paid $20 a second. I was like, man, I could do this track
Yeah.
stuff.
Like this can work.
Yeah, it works. And it was like the first time. I beat Edwin. He fell in the race, right? He fell in the race.
Mm.
And that kind of messed me up because I was like running the race and he was gone. It's like even the makeup of the race itself. Right before the race, it starts raining. It was kind of like the women's race in Paris. Right
Oh
before they
yeah, yeah,
ran,
yeah.
or like even the men's triple jump, right before the
Yeah, right
triple jump
before. Yep,
started,
yep.
it just started to rain, and it was raining light, and it start as the race as the gun went off, the rain just got heavier and heavier as we went around the track, and it was of course one of those tracks with great bright, big bright lights. The track started to puddle up really quick in certain areas, and I'll never forget. And that's the reason why it was so shocking when Edwin fell because it took me a few years to ask him what happened because I had took the race out. I was on the outside lane, gun goes off, I'm gone. I was like, they're gonna have to catch me now. Then of course when it started raining, I was like, I really got to get this over with real quick. So I'm gunning it out. I get to 300 meters, right? The infamous 300 meters. And then the bear started kicking in. And I was like, oh, it's hurting now. And then Edwin passes me. Amadou Diaba passes me. No, Edwin already passed me at 7. He's gone. And as he got into the straightaway, he's running, and all of a sudden he just fell. And it was just so odd because you don't see Edwin fall in no races like that. And he falls. And then you're gonna active runner. I step over the hurdle, I get down, I finished the race. I think I took third place. And I had asked Edwin, I said, what happened? And Edwin wears glasses,
Yeah.
we all wear glasses these days. Um, and Edwin says right before he jumped over either the 10th hurdle, it puddled up right in front of him. And like in that stadium, the
Oh
lights came in this, on the back street. Obviously, you got the lights around
man.
the ring. Particular light, it shone, obviously, the glare had hit the puddle.
Oh man.
And as he was running in his 13 steps into the hurdle, and he knew his step count where he was going to, take off, he said, as soon as he got up on the hurdle to take off, that's when he realized there was a puddle. And then he went to go up, and the glare was there. And he said he couldn't see nothing when he went airborne. And
Oh
he
man.
clipped the hurdle and fell really, really hard. He was blinded, literally blinded by the light. Fell, hit the track, rolled over, and like all the photographers that were in like the photography mode on off to the side, all you can just hear it. That's like the biggest story in the newspaper that summer at that time. And the race was continued. I think either Danny or Amadou won the race, and Edwin had just kind of got up and kind of walked toward the finish line, crossing the tape. And then all the reporters were like coming around. Well, photographers were coming around him taking photos and all that. And of course, we all kind of just got moved away for testing and all that sort of thing. But I remember that. I will never forget that. The first time I beat Edwin and got $1,000.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And that's like like, I know athletes today, they'd be like, oh, if we got $1,000, that's like nothing to athletes today. They're asking for a lot more. But like I love that it's crazy that whole experience is
Yeah,
around like, yo, I got $1,000 and I beat Edwin Moses and it was raining. It's like all of that just like happened.
all that, yes.
That is so cool. That is so cool.
That's when they had
Yeah.
the stadium that was in close to the Saint Denis, um,
Mm.
in that
Okay,
area of
so
Paris.
that's not like where they built
They
um the current
No,
the
it was,
field.
it was a different. It was a
Different.
different because this one was literally by the projects or quote unquote
Yeah, 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 yeah. In
the
Paris.
apartment structure they had a lot of folks living in. You can actually look out. They could actually look out their window onto the infield at the track because the building's so tall, and that was kind of interesting. I had a good friend of mine who lives in LA was saying, "Yo, Kev, my sister lived in one of them buildings, and she was watched to meet all the time. And you guys used to run down there in Paris. That was years." But like I said, as a youngster,
Yeah.
the matriculation, 'cause like I said, I go from just watching my heroes from the '84 Olympics. I mean, that's where I came from. I came from being glued to the TV in '84 and then literally making the Olympic team the next 4 years and my own personal pursuits of being being a medalist, and it's just watching those changes. and just watching it really kind of no, not really watching the sport change itself.
When you got to Seoul in '88, and I know you obviously didn't get a medal there, but like, did you imagine that just 4 years later you'd become Olympic champion?
The dream was always after Seoul,
Mhm.
the dream was to get a medal.
Just a medal.
The medal. When you take fourth place in the Olympics, you just want a medal the next time out. If you have an opportunity, because first and foremost, obviously to make an Olympic team is tough. You know, I can imagine all the youngsters in the West Indies trying to make their particular Olympic team is crazy. Same thing in the U.S. making these teams, and so once you make that Olympic team, that's the accomplishment within itself. And you can start getting the gear and all the stuff that lets you know that you're an Olympian. And then, of course, you got to realize once you get to the Olympics, you realize, okay, now it starts. It kicks in. When I took fourth place in '88,
Hmm.
and it wasn't the perfect race that I was looking forward to. Um, but it was a situation where I remember getting caught up in the Olympic hype. I never like the flashing lights and just the circumstances and and the magnanimity of the tradition of the Olympics, right? The stadium and the crowd and the noise and these great athletes that I've watched. And like think about it. I've raced behind these guys in the course of the summer. So now we get to the games. I think I just had my birth. I did. I just had my birthday. I just turned 22 years old. And the good thing was I had my collegiate teammates that were on the team with me. I had Steven with me, Danny was
Yeah.
there, Mike was there. Of course, then guys like Butch Reynolds.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, we had Lee McNeil,
Hmm.
Lee
Hmm.
McCray. I think Dennis was on the squad as
Yeah, Dennis
well.
was there. Yep.
So we had a lot of all. It was a lot of collegians on that U.S. team. And like what typically is as the teams from these countries, right? And so when I got there, I ain't gonna lie, I just got in the stadium and I was like, wow, I got to run and all this. And my energy level was just doing this, peaking and dropping, trying to figure out, do I warm up? How do I warm up? Just kind of get in sync. And it's like a lot of certain little things that I remember doing. But I know you got more questions.
No, no. I mean, it's crazy because even in that 1998 or 1988 in Seoul, it's like the fact that you were like caught up in the Olympic hype, but like you kind of almost like you finished fourth, you almost got on the podium, not too far
No,
off,
I
right?
had, I had, I had, I had a, I had a, the greatest, I had a great history is really cool for me. I can say that, right? For the simple fact that I remember when I was in the 10th grade running track in high school, first year, we had an athletics banquet and Florence Griffin Joyner, before she was a Joyner, Florence Griffin,
Hmm.
uh, she was our guest at the high school because we went to the same high school, different years.
Yep.
And I remember her being there, sitting at the table, and I do remember taking photographs with her. And I'm just happy to be able to participate locally in high school meets, not really, and not even telling myself that I'm going to be an Olympian one day. That didn't happen until the following year.
Hmm.
And I remember that became my directive, my personal directive. And I was a high hurdler at the time. I was nowhere an intermediate hurdler whatsoever. I wanted to be a high hurdler like my cousin. And well, I was a high hurdler like my cousin. But going to UCLA and then literally being glued to TV in '84 and then going to UCLA that fall and then watching those same athletes out on the track, I was like, wow, I'm by all these great track and field athletes. And that osmosis kind of carried me into Seoul. And when I
Hmm.
got to Seoul, taking fourth place behind Edwin of all people, the cool piece was that when Andre won the gold medal, because
Hmm.
I watched Andre literally train with Bobby at UCLA year in and year out. I watched him get hurt, get injured. Um, I watched him miss opportunities of racing overseas in Europe in races. on the circuit uh, because he got hurt right before our national championships or our national championships and didn't have an opportunity to even come over. And then so in '88, when he went out there and ran and won the gold medal
Hmm.
and set an Olympic record,
Yep.
it was I literally I and we actually over this we discussed this. We actually I shared that moment with him, and that was a great feeling. And it was so crazy because like you mentioned earlier, you said the different stories that come out of someone else's story. Two great things for me happened in '88. One was we had just finished our 400-meter hurdle race. We just finished the race. I was still on the track. I had taken fourth place, and I remember just happy for Andre. We were out there hugging each other. Um, and then I found out later, Andre takes a victory lap,
Hmm.
obviously after him winning the gold medal. And I had kind of drifted off to the side. And so Dre was literally looking for me because he wanted me to run around the track with
Oh
him in
man.
Seoul to take the victory lap. And then at one point I go back and I look at the footage. That's the beauty of YouTube. I go back and look at the race, and you can catch I caught camera angles of him, looking over his shoulder, looking for me, right? I'm just in the stadium, just hearing the crowd and noises and the craziness, right? But then after that, runs the her women's 200-meter race. So I'm
Mm.
off, I'm off to the side with all the cacophony, all the craziness, all the chaos. Flojo runs, wins the women's 200 meters, um, drops to her knees, gives a little prayer and do
Yep.
all that.
Yep.
And I'm off to the side in the crowd. I'm seeing folks with flags and stuff screaming, yelling. So I'm signing autographs and just being a part of the moment. And literally, um, I had to be standing off to the side. And Flojo, she says she gestures me to come out, to come out to the track because she was actually getting interviewed. She came off to the side and literally she gestures for me to come over. I got this big flag in my hand, right? And the big number one that I got from this gentleman who was stationed there, Mr. Robert Bryce. Shout out to Robert Bryce, uh, Jr. for giving me that flag. Um, anyway, I end up giving her the flag, and she runs around the track with the flag in her hand. And then I'm like, damn, that became the historical link between Flo and myself
Wow.
in 1988. So obviously she's the darling of the 88 Olympic Games. Uh, she's on the cover of all these magazines. She's
Hmm.
great Flo at that time, and like literally that Polaroid moment is captured of me giving her the flag and running around. So I always said that became my Olympic connection. How it literally flowed. She's a Watts icon. I became a Watts icon. We both watch superheroes, as I like to say, and that became I guess, my spark. So after that, I was like, okay, I know how to make an Olympic team. And then nothing in '88, I mean '89, the following year was the very first time I became the number one ranked 400-meter hurdler in
Hmm.
1989, year after the Olympics. I think Dre got hurt in early '89 or in
Yeah.
'89,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he didn't participate to have a complete season. I think I had the fastest time that year, obviously, in the 400-meter hurdles. Edwin had retired. Edwin, that was, I
Yeah.
think, '88 was his last race. So I literally became the number one world ranked hurdler in the world, and so that was my feather in the. And going back to those stories, going back to the hood, seeing my partners, yo, and it was bittersweet because it was a lot of moments, a lot of friends of mine that gotten either killed, murdered, demise in those summer, that 90 days of the summer, that we would graduates from my high school, we would always go back to the high school for football games, or
Hmm.
little, what do you call the little Friday prep shows, what they used to call them, prep rallies.
Pep rallies. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
We have our old, high school Letterman jackets, and everybody's kind of catching up with each other, all the alumni, and a lot of, like I said, a lot of bittersweet moments somewhere in which I was hoping to meet up with my classmates there, but sometime early in
Yeah.
that year, they had lost their life, and it was like,
Man.
and those things you kind of discuss and talk about while you're in high school, then as you get older. So there's a lot of missed memories that
Yeah.
happen. Um, but the beauty of it is just being grounded and having an opportunity to share the stories with folks that were around.
Yeah. That's the thing. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And like you like I guess through your career, maybe it's like you get a chance to do things that, these people they didn't get a chance to do. It's like you almost
Yeah.
like you can live a life that they didn't get a chance to, right? You can enjoy and live that. So
I got
yeah.
buddies that they used to beat my tail
Yeah.
on the track team together, mind you, in high school. And they served me all the time. I was always second, third place behind them. And so the story is always, I used to whip your ass back in high school. It's like, yeah, you're right. You're right. I can't deny it. I don't get offended because this it's like a feather in their hat. Like, yo, this is my boy. He the world record holder. But in high school, I used to tie him up.
Yeah.
I'm just standing like, yeah, you're right. You definitely. I said, you're the reason why I ran as fast as I can. And everybody, one thing about it, you have friends, those type of friends. Everybody takes credit in your success, which is a great thing.
Yeah, yeah. That it's like you could all share a moment together, right? You could all
Yeah,
share
yeah.
that together,
Because
which is
they
great.
seen your matriculation. They seen where I mean, and that not just goes for the local the cats in my high school, but literally guys that I raced with in the whole city who went to different high schools.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys who we ran together and they advanced in the state meet. I didn't earlier years. Um, I go off to college, and then, like I said, my learning curve was a lot slower than a lot of other people. You had a lot of standout athletes in high school, um, but then obviously a lot of athletes once they got to college, a lot of them couldn't crack the code, I guess you would say.
Yeah,
Different
yeah,
things happen
yeah,
along the
yeah.
way. And I was one of
Yeah.
the lucky ones, man. Literally, I was definitely one of the lucky ones because I saw track to me as a way out. I'm not gonna lie, it was an opportunity. And then and like sometimes you just want an opportunity because, like I said, when I got to UCLA, it was like, man, there's a lot of guys I got as a walk on. There's a lot of guys I got to show up because if I don't show up, I'm gonna get that phone call by the team manager saying, you're no longer needed. You don't need to come back out on the track today. And UCLA was one of these situations where you knew you made the track team, and sometimes it really wasn't. It was still a gray area when you trained long enough that you're able to go an opportunity. They send you to the equipment room to get the six-pack of the UCLA track shirt, t-shirt. They give you like an eight-pack of tube socks. They give you some shorts. Uh, and this is even before they give you the sweatsuit. They'll give you the t-shirts. So when you made the team, you get the t-shirts with the UCLA track on it. You get the running socks, and then you get the two sweatsuits. You get the home sweatsuit, and then you get basically the nylon rain suit to cover up
Mm,
the other suit. So that was like I made the team.
you
Oh,
made
yeah.
it.
It was always a situation where the coaches will bust you up in practice, and then you'll get that go to such and such. I want you to go to the equipment room and go see the manager. Right after practice between the track and going to the weight room.
Mm.
And
You do it. You do it.
because you get to go back to the dorms and talk your stuff. Then you got a
Oh
lot of
man.
guys who been out there on the track with you for the past 6 weeks, and they're not coming with you. They're not training with you the next week, and you got to see them
Man.
in the dorms. You got to see them in the
Oh
dorms
man.
the rest of the year. You're like, oh man, that's rough.
That's rough. That's rough. That's crazy. That is crazy. But those are stories, man. And like you said, that all fed into 1988. And so you made the cover of Track and Field News in 1988, right? Was that your first cover?
My first cover was when I won my first
NCAA
my,
title?
my first or second NCAA championships. Um, so I guess that was no, that was my second NCAA championship. So that was 1988.
Okay, okay, okay.
88, my senior year. So I made the cover of I remember that was UCLA Hurdle Ace. That was that cover. Had me Great picture of me jumping over her with my UCLA on, jersey on, singlet. And that was, like I said, like those are the different measuring sticks that you have as a track athlete. If if you don't if you have an opportunity to make the cover of Track and Field News, the Bible of the sport,
Hmm.
no, you can't.
That's what it
That's
is.
it. That's it, right? And for me, that was it. Like I said, the fact that I had I think prior to that, matter of fact, it did happen in 86. I got a little blurb in Track and Field News. I think I think they got an on your mark section. The little
Okay, just a little small
right.
section is when you finally got
Yeah,
in
and,
first.
and I did that thing. John Hendershot did an article on me because in that particular race in 86, when I raced against Danny Harris, knowing that he had just won he had won the gold medal. I mean, not the gold, but the silver in LA in
Hmm.
84. Now it's 2 years later. He's taking it, he's a junior at Iowa. Is it Iowa State he went to? Iowa State, I believe.
Hmm.
And Danny goes out there, and I'm in the race. I'm a nervous wreck. I take the race out, and I end up going 11 steps between one of the hurdles because my steps got off from the first hurdle. Instead of getting there with my left leg, I just bolted out, got to the hurdle with my right leg and jumped it, and then my pattern was just totally off. So I'm alternating, going right leg, left leg, right leg, left leg, and it's all 12 steps. And I'm like, oh my God, this is something I've never done, right? And I remember having to go 11 steps just to get back on 13.
That's
And then at that
crazy.
time, I was exhausted. Danny passes me in the race, but I was just so happy for the simple fact that here I am taking second place behind the silver medalist of the Olympic silver medalist, and no one knew who I really particularly was. I'm just this skinny kid coming out of LA, from UCLA, because at that time, a lot of the guys from the Midwest and East Coast, they dominated the hurdles. They were the guys. I mean, it was basically guys who made it to the national championships back in '85, the '85 season.
Mm. Mm.
I think I went as far as our conference championships, and that was it. And so you had guys who had a summer after a collegiate summer after their conference championship going into the national championships. So I remember after our Pac-10, I think I had a summer job painting walls, doing rehab on houses and stuff, while those same guys actually, and I realized this a lot. I didn't understand a lot of that the under 21, under 20 stuff. I mean, I didn't realize that there
Mhm.
were actually national teams, international teams that you can make
Yeah.
collegially. After you're in, and like I said, I wasn't even pushed in that direction. So you had guys who were on the under 23 teams, and they were going to China and going to Japan, and they were bouncing around, going, internationally. And I at that time, that wasn't even something I even thought about. Like I
That's
said, I was just
crazy.
happy to make the team first and foremost, and then
Yeah.
to get as far as the Pac-10 championships. I think I took fifth place overall. Then all that changed the following year, my sophomore year. NCAA runner-up, right behind the silver medalist from games, and then going to Europe. I was like, wow.